I was able to hit Immortal 3 by only playing Vyse, and in this video I'll be going over some tips, setups, and just generally things I learned throughout all my games. Even though you'll already be familiar with some of these things, chances are if you make it all the way to the end of the video you'll learn something new. For example, here's the general setup I love to use towards the A side on Haven. That wall is perfect for isolating anyone that entries out of long, and then the flash just goes up high behind me somewhere, that way it'll get all the enemies without blinding me or my team at all.
Watch out! Wall trick. My ultimate's ready. Thorn's activated. Wall's lightning. Good hit.
So that's one of my go-to setups where every piece of utility is impactful, and you can even see in that example, the Razorine ended up getting me a kill, and I'll talk more about that ability in particular shortly. Then another general tip I've got is to always communicate your setups and game plan with your teammates. This one might seem obvious, but especially considering you've got a flash in your kit, the last thing you want to do is blind your teammate and stop them from helping you. Speaking of communication, if you don't already have a microphone or simply want an upgrade, HyperX have you covered with the Quadcast 2S. In case you're not already familiar with this microphone, it's got a super convenient tap to mute sensor on top, which is easily my favorite feature. It's also customizable using the HyperX Ingenuity software, where you can change things from the audio settings to how the lights appear on it. This new and improved model boasts better recording quality compared to the original Quadcast, and it just looks better as well. On top of that, they added a multi-function dial which allows you to not only adjust your microphone gain, but also switch between all four of the polar patterns, whatever your needs may be. If that wasn't enough, they also made it easier to remove the microphone from the shock mount in order to attach it to a boom arm or whatever else you like. To get your own Quadcast 2S today, check out the link in the description or pinned comment, and thanks again to HyperX for sponsoring this video. Now I want to focus specifically on the Razorine for a little bit, because I think a lot of people underrate this ability. For starters, even though the damage is low, it's perfect for the Outlaw, as only 2 ticks will reduce the enemy to 1 shot. You can see throughout this bonus round, my team's weaker weapons find kills they normally wouldn't, and just that first Razorine alone ended up dealing almost 200 damage. They last for an insanely long amount of time too. Even though I get destroyed by a judge here, you can see the damage and impact of the Razorines just keeps going up, even though this round was only a save. Razorine is especially strong against movement duelists too. If you saw my myth busting video, you'll know a dashing jet gets shredded by the thorns, and in this case the other agents with movement abilities were slowed and left easy pickings for my ISO. Of course, the thorns also make noise as enemies walk through them, so if you pay attention you'll know exactly where they are.
Thorns are alive.
Right here.
Perfect.
If you know where an enemy is, you can place a Razorine in front of them, stopping them from swinging out and trading their teammate.
Thorns activated.
One enemy
Down.
remaining.
My ultimate's ready. Okay.
Another admittedly situational use case is to flash out enemies hiding in smokes, as it'll stop your team from progressing a little bit, but more importantly prevent the other player from falling back.
Please.
And finally, for the Razorine, keep in mind that even though the damage is low, it will apply to your teammates as well. Here I use it carelessly, and my poor Omen ends up getting killed by it, so yeah, careful where you place these things. Overall, you've got a really solid ability here. It's perfect to stop the enemy flooding to a choke point. Both the space covered and duration especially are strong. Next, let's focus on Vyse's shear or wall ability and some of the use cases for it. Obviously, more often than not, you'll just drop it towards the front of sight somewhere and then catch the enemy duelists as they dash or satchel out onto sight. On defense, you'll usually want to avoid putting shear directly on the choke point and instead find somewhere else a little bit further out that the enemy still has to cross. By doing this, you're much more likely to actually divide their team and isolate some fights. Worst case though, even if the enemy does manage to bait your wall, that's still 7 seconds that they're blocked from entering onto the site, and it buys time for your team to rotate and be ready for when they actually hit. If you're struggling for kills, you can even try locking the enemy in with you and a judge. Might not be the most respectable strategy out there, but it's pretty effective.
Wall trip. Shame.
On a map like Icebox, where the enemy can normally just jump over your wall anyway, one thing I like to do from time to time was use my flash to clear mid first, then keep that space by leaving a wall there. That way it's just one less thing to worry about, although I definitely wouldn't use my wall like this all the time, because this is the predictable sort of thing the enemy team can easily bait to fake info. That brings us to leaving your wall to watch flank on attack, which I honestly don't mind. You definitely disrupt the enemy team more by putting shear in the way of their retake, but at the end of the day, passive info on flank is really useful in ranked, and the ability does only cost 200 credits like a Cypher trip.
Wall trip.
enemy remaining.
But yeah, otherwise dropping it right in the way of the enemy is a safe bet. Here, ideally, I would have placed it earlier, but it still ended up working.
Wall trip.
One enemy remaining. Last player standing.
Walling off the spike in particular is a nice little trick as well. I'd argue disrupting the enemy team earlier on is more likely to get value in kills, but still, this is something you can try to change things up.
Wall flashing. Good hit.
Overall, my main tip for Sheer is to just change things up and don't keep placing the same wall down. Look for different ways to split up the enemy team and catch them off guard. That brings us to Vyse's signature ability, Arc-Rose. It's versatile and a lot of fun to find spots for it. One of my favorites was towards drop on Lotus, which would always catch the players coming out of tree. Another flash I loved building setups around was this one for B-side descent. In this particular clip, I popped it a little late for my deadlock, but you see the vision. You should also keep an eye out for places like these two, where you can place the flash before the barrier drops and then use it to take the fight to the attackers.
One enemy remaining.
Typically, you'll want to pick your flash up again immediately after using it. It's a massive cooldown after being broken, and more often than not, that's exactly what the enemy team will do. I only had a few cases where it lasted in the same spot, and that was shortly after Vyse's release when people were less familiar with their kit.
10 seconds left.
Good hit.
Like I was saying with the wall earlier, I sometimes use the flash on defense to take space, which is even more effective if you're setting up your teammate to be the one peeking.
Scanning ahead. Good hit.
One enemy remaining.
Arc-Rose has its uses on attack too. One thing I did a lot was use it immediately at the start of the round for info, for example to see if anyone crossed A main on Abyss. When I used it that early, by the time the cooldown was up, I could then use it again to help my teammates fight backside. Otherwise, you can just use it to entry out of the main choke point, whether it's you or your teammates who are peeking off the flash. Another spot I consistently found value out of Arc-Rose was here in backside on ascent.
One enemy remaining.
In a case where you've got no teammates on site, it's guaranteed to hit the enemy whether they're coming from lane or stairs. In general, this ability is perfect for that sort of post-plant scenario, as not only will it give you information about if anyone is out on site already, it'll also blind them if they're on the spike.
One enemy remaining.
Good hit.
This was easily the ability I had the most fun playing around with, and again, just like the wall, as long as you're switching up wherever you're putting it and keeping it out of your teammates' eyes, you can't really go wrong. Finally, let's talk about Vyse's ultimate, Steel Garden. A lot of the time you'll find yourself using it in similar locations to a Killjoy lockdown, as they do have the exact same range and similar use case. So for example, C on Lotus is the perfect site for this ult. Whether you're attacking or retaking the area, it just covers so much space and doesn't give the enemy much room to escape. One advantage of Steel Garden compared to a Killjoy lockdown though is that it activates faster. This makes it great for flood retakes right as the enemy is starting to get the spike planted.
Not ready yet.
Fire in the hole! Back like I never left!
Wall trip.
One enemy remaining.
You can also keep in mind that the enemy will try to run out of the ultimate if they think it's safe, so in this case that forced them straight into my fade right as they had no guns. Just because the enemies don't have their main weapon doesn't mean they aren't a threat though. We all know how powerful the classic can be at times, and I learned the hard way to not just dive into the site as if the enemy was detained. Another thing I had to learn the hard way in game was to not bother ulting an enemy chamber. Of course he will still have his headhunter, but apparently that did not cross my mind. One last thing to be mindful of is enemies rushing you last second before their gun gets taken away. What is a good use case for Steel Garden though is for clearing out Viper ults. It's a great answer, especially if she's sitting there with something like a judge. As much as ideally this ultimate gives you a weapon advantage over the enemy, you can also use it to just bring them down to your level when you're stuck with an eco weapon.
Spike planted.
Multiple enemies. Target down.
One enemy remaining.
Overall, I had a lot of fun playing Vyse to start off this act, but I don't think she's crazy strong. Not quite as bad as say Deadlock on release, and she's definitely not in desperate need of buffs, but oftentimes your team will rather have a more quote-unquote standard sentinel like a Cypher. Let me know how you guys are finding Vyse in ranked though, and what you change about her kit, if anything, to balance it.